The snowstorm had buried the valley for 3 full days before anyone heard a knock on the old cabin door at the edge of the timberline. Inside, Maria Alvarez, once the proud daughter of a ranching family, sat beside her small wood stove, listening to the crackle of fire and the soft whimpers of her daughter, Sophia, who pressed her thin face against her mother's shoulder. Hunger had a sound, and it had been echoing in the cabin for too long. Maria had not expected survival to look like this. A single mother, abandoned by her husband during the hardest winter the territory had seen in years, with no cattle left, no crops, and no company besides the wind moaning through the cracks in the walls. When the knock came again, firmer this time, Maria stiffened. Out here, uninvited visitors were either salvation or trouble. Slowly she opened the door, and the icy wind pushed into the cabin, followed by the tall figure of a man holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. His cheeks were red from the cold. His long dark hair hung damp over his shoulders, and snow dusted his worn jacket. He didn't speak at first. He simply lifted the bundle toward her. "Bread and milk," he said, his voice low and steady. "For the child." Maria blinked. She knew this man only by rumor. Some called him Two Rivers, the quiet horse trainer who lived alone near the river bends. Others said he rarely spoke to anyone, that he preferred the company of animals to people. But in that moment, Maria saw something different in his eyes. Not pity, but concern shaped into determination. "I can't take this," she whispered. "You need it yourself." He shook his head, one subtle, resolute motion, and placed the food on the table anyway. Then he stepped back into the swirling snow and left without another word. He came again the next morning, and the next, and the next. Each time he arrived at dawn, always carrying bread and milk, sometimes a few apples, sometimes dried venison. He never forced conversation, never asked for anything in return. He would simply nod, place the food on the table, check if the fire was still burning well enough, and then leave. But Maria began to notice the details, the way he always looked at Sophia first, ensuring she was warm, the way he brushed snow off his shoulders before entering so he wouldn't dirty her floor, the way he lingered just a second before leaving, as if making sure she was safe before turning his back. On the 7th morning, when the wind had gentled, Maria finally asked him, "Why do you help us?" He paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Because someone once helped my mother when I was too small to remember," he said quietly, "and because no one deserves to starve in a land big enough to feed us all." After that, Maria found herself waiting for him. She hated that she waited, hated how her heart reacted to the crunch of footsteps outside, hated how warmth bloomed in her chest when she opened the door and found him standing there with that same silent strength. But loneliness had sharp edges, and this man seemed to soften them without even trying. One morning, during a particularly crimson sunrise, Maria invited him to stay for tea. He hesitated, then nodded. Sitting across from him, she studied the roughness of his hands, the faded stitching of his coat, the calmness that seemed to travel with him like a shadow. Sophia warmed to him instantly, babbling shyly about her drawings and tiny wooden toys he had carved for her. Two Rivers listened with the gentleness of someone unused to being welcomed but grateful for it. Days bled into weeks and winter lost its cruelty. Maria noticed how her laughter started returning in small pieces. She caught him looking at her sometimes, not with boldness, but with the cautious admiration of a man who understood loss and didn't want to cause further pain. The truth was, his presence began to feel like safety, real safety, the kind she hadn't felt even when she was married. Yet she wondered what he wanted. Then came the morning that changed everything. The sky was pale gold, the air crisp. When Maria opened the door, Two Rivers stood differently, straighter, more certain, as if he carried something heavier than food. In his hands was not the usual bundle. Instead, he held only his hat, clutched against his chest. Maria frowned. "Where's the bread and milk?" He took a breath, steady but emotional. "Today," he said, meeting her eyes with a sincerity that struck straight through her ribs. "I bring you something else. If you'll accept it." Maria's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" His voice softened, almost breaking. "I bring you my heart." The silence that followed felt sacred. She saw it then. All the mornings he had walked miles in the snow, all the small acts of kindness, all the quiet watching to make sure she and her daughter lived. Her breath trembled. She wasn't ready. She was terrified, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope rising like the sunrise behind him. Before she could speak, he added gently, I ask for nothing. I expect nothing. But if one day you wish to accept my heart fully, it will be yours. And then he bowed his head, as if offering something fragile. Maria's voice shook as she whispered, Please, come inside. From the moment she asked him to come inside, something shifted, quietly, delicately, like a bird landing on a branch without bending it. The cabin warmed not because the fire grew stronger, but because a new presence settled in, a presence Maria had unknowingly been waiting for. Two Rivers removed his boots by the door, hesitant but respectful, then followed her to the small table where the morning light pooled like honey on the wood. Sophia climbed immediately into his lap, trusting him without question. As he helped her sip warm milk, Maria observed him with a heart that felt both too heavy and too light. This man had stepped into her darkest winter without expectation, without demand, without judgment. That alone was enough to stir a storm of emotion inside her. But the confession he had made, the offering of his heart, echoed louder than the crackling fire. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what she deserved. So she simply spoke the truth. I'm afraid, she said, fingers trembling around her cup. Two Rivers looked up slowly, his eyes calm, steady, unthreatening. So am I, he admitted. But fear is not always a warning. Sometimes it is the body remembering what hurt us. Before, his words wrapped around her like a blanket. My husband left, she whispered. Not just left, he broke me before he walked out that door. I don't know if I have anything left to give. Two Rivers nodded, never looking away. Then let me give to you, he replied softly. For as long as you need. Something inside Maria cracked, not painfully, but like ice breaking to let a river flow again. The weeks that followed became a slow blooming, the kind that happens only when the soil is finally ready. Two Rivers continued to bring bread and milk, but now he stayed longer. He repaired the broken fence outside, patched the roof where the snow had seeped in, and taught Maria how to chop wood in a way that didn't strain her back. He carved Sophia small wooden animals, each one more detailed than the last. And he spoke, not often, but meaningfully. She learned that he had lost his parents young, that he had built his own cabin with his own hands, that he had once loved a woman who had died in childbirth, taking their child with her. Maria listened, heart swelling with the weight of everything he had carried alone. One evening, as orange twilight painted the sky, Maria found him near the corral, brushing his horse. He glanced at her but said nothing. Why me? She asked quietly. Why bring your heart to me? He paused, fingers stilling in the horse's mane. Because, he said, turning toward her with a vulnerability that stole her breath, you fight to survive even after life has torn you down. Because your smile, when it returns, feels like watching the sun rise after weeks of storm. And because your daughter looks at you as if you hung the moon, I want to protect that. Not replace anything. Not take anything. Just stand beside you. Tears touched Maria's eyes before she could stop them. She had been abandoned, dismissed, belittled. But here stood a man offering something so simple it felt more powerful than anything she'd known. Partnership, understanding, a future not built on fear. Still, she needed time, and Two Rivers understood that without being told. Days grew longer, winter began to loosen its grip, and Maria found herself laughing more, real laughter that came from somewhere deep. She noticed how often Two Rivers gently brushed Sophia's hair back from her face, how he always let her hold his hand when they walked outside, how he made the cabin feel like a home rather than a shelter. One morning, well into spring, Maria stepped outside to find him feeding the chickens he had gifted her weeks before. He looked up when he heard her, his expression softening. She approached slowly, heart pounding, breath trembling. I'm ready, she whispered. His brow lifted slightly. For what? For the heart you offered me, she said, tears shimmering. If you still want to give it. He exhaled deeply, like a man who had held his breath for months. He stepped forward, brushed a thumb along her cheek, and said, It has been yours. Since the first day you— Open that door! Sophia squealed behind them, running into Two Rivers' arms as if sealing the promise herself. And as the sun rose over the valley, casting gold across their small world, Maria realized something extraordinary. He had not saved her. He had reminded her she was worth saving. That day, as they stood together, woman, child, and the man who chose them, Maria finally understood that love arrives not in grand gestures, but in bread and milk delivered at dawn. Until one day, It becomes a heart offered, pure and unwavering.